Back in 1984, moviegoers experienced one of the best horror comedies of all time, Ghostbusters. The movie became the talk of the town in no time, and it garnered a pretty large fan following. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man wreaking havoc in the city? Yep, that iconic scene lives absolutely rent-free in my head. Now, when the Ghostbusters became so iconic, milking the IP was the only decision studios were going to make, and thus came The Real Ghostbusters cartoon in 1986, and it was surprisingly good. I mean, for starters, The Real Ghostbusters didn't feel like just another toy commercial. Developed by Joe Medjuck and Michael C. Gross, the cartoon had genuine character-driven storylines with a real sense of horror, at least for the first few seasons, as the show dealt with some serious business. However, things slowly began to change, and The Real Ghostbusters seemed to lose its spark. Suddenly, the stories didn't feel as sharp, and mature plot lines were being traded for oversimplified, childish ideas. Now, that's when you realize that the network has gotten a little too involved with the creative decisions, and most times that leads to a dip in quality, and it was no different for The Real Ghostbusters, which left the picture completely in 1991, with many fans disappointed by how quietly it disappeared. But hey, a tree doesn't fall at the first blow, and that's where we come in today, to actually see the trajectory of how The Real Ghostbusters met its inevitable end. It's a fascinating story, and we're going to explain it to you in detail, so without wasting another second, let's get right into it.
The show that surprised everyone. You know, I still remember sitting in my pajamas in front of the TV when this thing played. Back on September 13th, 1986, The Real Ghostbusters had begun its journey. The series ran on ABC, and it was jointly produced by Deke Enterprise in association with Columbia Pictures Television. It was also distributed by Coca-Cola Telecommunications. But why did they suddenly start a spin-off animated series for the 1984 film? The easy answer is the success of the film, and yeah, that was a big part of it. However, there were some issues with the rights over the name Ghostbusters. See, while the movie was being showered with love, Filmation realized it would be a good time to cash in on the renewed interest in Ghostbusters and launched an animated sequel to their 1975 live-action Ghostbusters show, which came to be known as Filmation's Ghostbusters. Obviously, this raised Columbia Pictures' eyebrows because Columbia was concerned about protecting its own franchise, and that's why it teamed up with Deke to make its own animated TV series. The show was thus partly a result of a title and animation rights situation because the Ghostbusters name had a history with Filmation before the 1984 film. We'll get to that in a little bit, but when Columbia's The Real Ghostbusters dropped, we were all blown away. Head writer J. Michael Straczynski, who would later go on to create Babylon 5 and write major storylines for Marvel and DC, ensured that the series maintained genuine continuity between episodes and allowed its characters to grow over time. Most importantly, he crafted horror stories that treated young viewers with respect, challenging their minds instead of talking down to them. Straczynski strongly opposed the notion that children needed diluted stories and actually fought executive mandates that he believed underestimated younger viewers. He told Television Academy, "They hire me on Ghostbusters, and that was probably the most fun I ever had on anything up to that point. I was writing for adults. I didn't worry about, kid writing. We got into science fiction, fantasy, the supernatural, whatever we wanted to do story-wise, the producers, Joe Medjuck and Michael Gross, backed us on 100%. We could get as obscure as we wanted. We could get as dark as we wanted. We did things about myth and mythology and fallen gods. They were okay with all of it. It was a great amount of fun." As a result, the earlier seasons of The Real Ghostbusters saw each character with a specific personality, which evolved over time, and the stories had genuinely scary elements like demonic possession or Lovecraftian entities. Hell, there was this one episode titled The Thing in Mrs. Faversham's Attic, and when that thing started possessing its victims, I was literally chewing my nails. This wasn't the sort of thing you'd see in every Saturday morning cartoon, and to make matters hit even harder, the voice cast did an amazing job. The original core voice cast included Lorenzo Music as Peter Venkman, Maurice LaMarche as Egon Spengler, Frank Welker as Ray Stantz and Slimer, Arsenio Hall as Winston Zeddemore, and Laura Summer as Janine Melnitz. Later, Dave Coulier from Full House would replace Music as Peter, Buster Jones would replace Arsenio Hall as Winston, and Kath Soucie replaced Summer as Janine. Believe it or not, the cast changes tell you a lot about what was going on in the boardroom meetings. The Real in The Real Ghostbusters. The Naming War. As we mentioned, the Ghostbusters name had already been connected to Filmation before the 1984 movie, and when Columbia was developing the film, it had to reach an accommodation to use the title and concept. Filmation's then president, Lou Scheimer, said, "One day, several years later, I picked up Variety and discovered that Columbia was doing a film called Ghostbusters. I called our attorney and we reached an accommodation with Columbia that allowed them to use the title and the concept in their motion picture. Sure, the deal allowed Columbia to use the name for the film, but critically, Filmation retained the right to produce an animated Ghostbusters series. In fact, Scheimer even approached Columbia about doing an animated series together based on the film, but they couldn't agree on terms. That's when Columbia and Ivan Reitman, the film's director, struck back and decided to do their own animated series. The then Columbia vice president of first-run syndication and cable, Rick Rosen, said Ghostbusters was obviously a very successful picture, one we thought was very translatable into animation. We felt that live action was best suited to a movie and had been captured perfectly in the feature. We met with almost every animation company in the business and chose Deke. Both decisions were made in conjunction with Ivan Reitman. We wanted his support to ensure that the program would be true to the concept of what everyone really believes to be Ghostbusters." Andy Hayward, president of Deke Animation Studio, added, "When Filmation announced they were going ahead with their series, Ivan Reitman decided to come out with one of his own, lest his franchise be damaged. Basically, Columbia had the movie but not the title, so they chose to call their series The Real Ghostbusters. But if you think about it, Filmation ultimately lost the popularity battle because Columbia had the hit 1984 movie, the familiar characters, the stronger pop culture momentum, the toy line, the lawyers, and everything else they needed to dominate the audience's attention. As a result, the Filmation Ghostbusters was discontinued after 65 episodes, while the Real Ghostbusters ran until 1991. J. Michael Straczynski and the Golden Era. We're not saying that The Real Ghostbusters was a one-man show, but we definitely can't deny that it was J. Michael Straczynski who made the first major era stand out. He didn't try to dumb things down just because it was a cartoon, and actually treated children as audiences who can use their brains, and we'll always love him for that. No wonder then that the show became a top-rated Saturday morning cartoon with a strong viewership. Straczynski created something extremely ambitious, and frankly, he didn't hesitate to lean into a darker tone, because for him, cartoons and mature themes could go side by side. Let me give you some examples. Ragnarok and Roll, which aired on September 16, 1987, is considered one of the finest episodes in the series. And guess who wrote it? That's right, J. Michael Straczynski. And guess what? He had the guts to show a breakup and tie in Norse mythology. Yep, Straczynski knew those kids that would be sitting in front of the TV with groggy eyes and a bowl of cereal. Still, he wrote about Jeremy, who was abandoned by his girlfriend, and how he and his friend, Detilio, unleash a dark force through a magical flute. It sets off the apocalypse from Norse mythology, and when they try to fix their mistake, the entity behind it nearly kills Jeremy. Thankfully, the Ghostbusters managed to shove that thing back where it came from and help repair the damage. Seriously, what other cartoon was doing stuff like that in 1987? Sadly, that's exactly the sort of thing that started to piss ABC off. The first instance of studio meddling came when they changed Janine Melnitz's personality in the second major era of the show. Her hairstyle was completely changed, and it now looked long and straight instead of short and spiky. Janine's short skirts became longer, and her small pointy eyeglasses were changed into big round ones. In Censoring Children's Television, J. Michael Straczynski wrote that The Watchmen also decided that the main female character in the series, Janine, a brassy, strong-willed, funny, and self-assertive character who had become very popular with the female audience, was too slutty, and suggested changes to make her a more nurturing mother figure. To that end, Kath Soucie came in as the new voice actor, and you won't believe what they said about the glasses. Straczynski recalled how the network told them to remove the glasses worn by one of the characters because they were angular, and children are frightened by sharp objects. Yup, that's right. ABC also ended up redubbing Peter and Janine's dialogue in several earlier episodes with Dave Coulier and Kath Soucie respectively. The abrupt changes made to Janine's character were addressed by Straczynski in the episode Janine, You've Changed, where the Ghostbusters and Slimer suddenly notice that Janine has changed a lot over the years while flipping through an old photo album. Their investigation reveals that a supernatural being posing as a fairy godmother was secretly responsible for all those transformations. I mean, it probably didn't land for kids of the days, but that's some biting satire. These sorts of creative restraints got under Straczynski's skin, and he eventually left the show, leading to The Real Ghostbusters starting an era of decline. ABC steps in. The toy notes that broke the show. Yup, things were getting tough for J. Michael Straczynski, but he didn't just up and leave the project one day. He was gulping the network's tantrums down for as long as he could and story edited about 70 episodes, out of which he wrote some 15 to 20 episodes on his own. At first, he described the experience as great. I loved it enormously because it was really an opportunity to cut loose and be very obscure, to bring all the classics of science fiction, fantasy, and horror to a genre for kids. I did stories about child abuse and more serious stories about older characters. It was great. It was a great opportunity. But when the seasons got dramatically different over time, Straczynski directly said it was because the network got consultants involved who wanted to help the show. Give each of them identifiable roles, so that Peter is the con man, Egon is the brains, Ray is the builder, and they said, make Winston the driver. Straczynski refuted that, saying, "You're out of your mind. I will not do that, and if you try and push that through, I will leave." Since this was ABC's #1 animated series, they didn't really think Straczynski would leave. To his credit, Straczynski tells the story like this. "I always tell people that when I work for them, I have very few rules. I don't lie, I don't bullshit, and I never, ever bluff. If I say I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go. And I went. Oddly enough, it was leaving there that opened up the door to go with live action with Captain Power, where they wanted to do a live action sci-fi series with some toy component, but nothing that touched the story. I did that and made it an adult science fiction show, which has a large fan base to this day. I did the first season on that, and then, of course, left when they tried to make it more toy-controlled." There you go, words from the man himself. The thing is, Kenner's Real Ghostbusters figurines hit store shelves in 1986 and sold like hotcakes. The show promoted the toys, and in turn, the toys promoted the show, and everyone was making money. Unfortunately, when executives smell money, they start getting ideas which aren't always good. For ABC, it was hiring the consulting firm Q5 to study children's viewing habits and tell producers what kids supposedly wanted. Their suggestions were so absurd that at one point, they even recommended writing Ray Stantz out of the show because their research claimed he wasn't contributing enough. According to writer Dennis McCoy, things started going downhill after Q5 arrived during season 3. In a Den of Geek interview, he said, "There was always this idea that children have to have somebody their own age in their cartoons. But how do you explain watching Bugs Bunny? He was obviously a 25-year-old guy." Sadly, ABC seemed far more interested in what consultants were saying than what the writers were. One change led to another, and soon, the very things that had made The Real Ghostbusters special no longer existed. What started as one of the smartest cartoons on television slowly became a safer, simpler show. Understandably, the ratings too followed the same downfall, and after 7 seasons, the series is usually counted as 140 Real Ghostbusters stories, though some episode guides count 134 broadcast episodes because several half hours contain 2 stories, and the later Slimer segments complicate that total even more. After all that, the Ghostbusters were finally sent home. Slimer, and the rebrand that said it all. When J. Michael Straczynski finally quit the show as the head writer, it was because he had reached a breaking point. He said, "I walked off the show rather than do that, and they then proceeded to do their version, which sank like a stone in the ratings." And right after he walked off, ABC didn't care because they believed they could pull things off, and it started by rebranding the show in later seasons. The Real Ghostbusters was now called Slimer and The Real Ghostbusters, and it was a decision that the show would no longer echo the tone of Straczynski's genius. Yeah, we all loved Slimer, the green ghost from the original film, but turns out nobody in the boardroom could get enough of Slimer, so the green blob was given his own dedicated cartoon segments. ABC was so eager to push Slimer that every 1 hour-long broadcast was changed to include 2 15-minute Slimer segments with a single Real Ghostbusters episode sandwiched in between them. Wow! And the Slimer segments totally stripped the show of much of its original essence. They were entirely comedic, focusing on Slimer's mundane daily adventures, and they were practically a slap to the mythology-rich world Straczynski had spent years building. In a 2009 DVD extended interview, Straczynski said, "My theory on Slimer was that a little Slimer goes a long way. I used him to pepper things, to be there as an instrument of chaos and randomness, develop his character a little bit, but don't go too far with it. I think what happened in this subsequent series demonstrates the point rather well. Because when they brought Slimer to the foreground and made it Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters, the ratings dropped and the attention dropped. And I think by putting him in front of it, it lost a lot of the adult audience. However, ABC soon realized that they had messed up big time and asked Straczynski to come back in the hopes that he could recapture some of the show's old magic. Straczynski said, "They finally called me back and said, listen, can you bring us some episodes that will bring us back to where we were, provided that I write it my way and not your way, and no junior Ghostbusters. I want to truck over them if they're in my episode, and Janine should be the way she should be. We changed her. I can fix that." So I wrote an episode where she discovers that she's been possessed by a demon that keeps wanting her to keep making over her appearance to try to, be more attractive, as all those women had self-image problems, and it was feeding off of that. And with that episode, I moved her back to what she had been before, or at least closer to it. Yet, the series never truly regained its footing, and by the final 1991 run, only 4 episodes aired before the show got shelved. Yeah, that math is pretty easy to do. The final episode. And then, it finally happened. The Real Ghostbusters went off the air after airing its final episode on October 5th, 1991. Titled 20,000 Leagues Under the Street, this episode shattered any hopes of a grand finale that could justly wrap up the adventures, which spanned across 7 seasons. Let me tell you what we actually got, and brace yourselves to be disappointed because, honestly, nothing about this episode feels like an ending. It starts with Peter Venkman having a nightmare where he was being chased by a giant insect monster. Once he wakes up, he's greeted by an ant farm that's arrived in the mail for Ray at the firehouse and immediately complains that the world would be a better place without bugs. Understandable, especially after the dream he had just had. Meanwhile, Janine and Winston learn about an ancient Egyptian god of insects, Apshai. According to legend, Apshai drew his strength from a magical crystal capstone hidden beneath the earth, and the moment a scarab connected to Apshai is opened, an earthquake shakes Manhattan, and deep underground, the crystal capstone begins to awaken. Uh-oh. Soon insects start to infest the city, and the Ghostbusters quickly discover that these are supernatural manifestations of a powerful force, aka Apshai. They do manage to neutralize the threat with a great deal of effort, but sadly, Peter faces the harshest blows, and that's about it. The Ghostbusters destroy the crystal capstone and call it a day. Not one moment of the episode felt like a proper closure or finale. There was no big fight with a recurring villain, and no resolution to any of the characters' journeys. This wasn't the kind of farewell we expected from this show. I mean, if you watched 20,000 Leagues Under the Street without knowing that it was the final episode, you'd simply think it was just another episode. But honestly, the way the ratings and the viewership of the show had been dropping, it wasn't much of a surprise that the Real Ghostbusters just quietly disappeared. The show had already shifted from Straczynski's vision, and we fell in love with that earlier version. Vanishing from our Saturday morning cartoon routine wasn't exactly a shock, it was just sad, and it never really registered as a proper end. Why does the show still matter? Despite its disappointing exit from the world of Saturday morning cartoons, The Real Ghostbusters remains one of the best pieces of work in the animation industry. Straczynski produced some of the most frightening segments in cartoons of the day, which challenged children to think and perceive things using their own intelligence rather than spoon-feeding them. And with that, The Real Ghostbusters was changing the landscape of what Saturday morning cartoons meant. Sadly, the show became a living example of how terribly things can go wrong when networks meddle a little too much. It ruined a top-rated show over time, and even now, the series still isn't available in one perfect, universally accessible package for everyone. As of now, the show is available in the US through the Roku channel and on digital purchase platforms like Prime Video, Apple TV, and Fandango at Home, though availability and episode counts can vary by region and licensing. In 1997, there was indeed an attempt to revive the craze around the Real Ghostbusters with the spin-off Extreme Ghostbusters. Produced by Columbia TriStar Television and Adelaide Productions, this show premiered on September 1st, 1997, and ran for just 40 episodes until it ended on December 8th of the same year. The series was set years after the end of The Real Ghostbusters, and only Egon remained in the firehouse with Slimer. This one, too, failed to opt for a grand curtain call and ended with yet another basic episode because, guess what? This one was cancelled too. Jason Marsden, one of the voice actors for the show, said on the Ship It Show podcast, "When I asked our producers, why did you guys decide to do another Ghostbuster series? They said, sell toys." Yeah, what? And I was like, oh, that's why. That's all it was. And because the toys didn't sell, despite the amazing work everyone did, both in front of the mic and behind the mic, and in the art department, all the animators, it suffered. It sounds to us like corporate meddling struck again. The Ghostbusters after the cartoon. What came next? So, what did the Ghostbusters future look like in the middle of all this network drama? Well, sadly, by the time The Real Ghostbusters went off the air in 1991, the live-action franchise 2 was already losing momentum. Ghostbusters 2 released in 1989, and sure, it made money, earning around $215 million worldwide, including over $112 million domestically, but it failed to match the huge success of the original film. Critics were far less impressed by this one, with many arguing that the sequel felt like a weaker attempt to rehash the first movie's formula. This led to a lack of enthusiasm for a third film, and to make matters worse, Bill Murray spent years expressing little interest in returning for another sequel. Without one of the franchise's biggest stars fully on board, Ghostbusters 3 was ultimately shelved. It would take over 3 decades for the franchise to finally move forward, with Jason Reitman's Ghostbusters Afterlife in 2021 releasing as a direct continuation of the original films. This film revolved around Egon Spengler's family and leaned heavily into the nostalgia factor, in many ways serving as a heartfelt tribute to both the 1984 classic and the late Harold Ramis. 3 years later, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire expanded that storyline even further. However, even when the franchise started getting its footing back, The Real Ghostbusters wasn't really brought back into the spotlight for this modern revival. And that's where it hits the hardest. Despite running for 7 seasons and becoming the definitive Ghostbusters experience for an entire generation, the cartoon rarely receives more than a passing acknowledgement. And honestly, that's a little ironic, you know? While the movies spent decades trying to recapture the magic of the original, The Real Ghostbusters had already managed it back in the 80s, because long after the toys disappeared from store shelves, we still remembered the collect call of Cthulhu and the boogeyman cometh. The Real Ghostbusters definitely deserved a better ending, and it pains us so much to revisit how this show actually went off the air. J. Michael Straczynski is a genius, and I guess our entire generation owes him for showing what cartoons were capable of. This show definitely needs a lot more love, and if we're lucky enough, maybe even a reboot, or, something like that. I'm going to leave this video on that helpful note, but don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button because it really helps us figure out what sort of videos we want to make next. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one.